Small beekeepers in developed countries usually purchase their queens from commercial suppliers because queen rearing is a very specialised undertaking and needs highly developed skills, considerable time and equipment, and years of experience. It is also almost impossible to rear good queens from a few hives which are expected to generate honey. We have seen earlier that queens from emergency or supersedure cells may be used to overcome immediate shortages of queens. However, in the Philippines, with only a small number of commercial beekeepers and a permanent shortage of available queens, beekeepers who are not able to rear queens systematically will hardly succeed. In this short video, we cannot show all aspects and ways of rearing queens, and we expect the viewer to have the basic knowledge of queen rearing methods. The most serious obstacle in this project was the lack of sufficiently strong colonies which allow queen rearing, and the shortage of drones during most times of the year. Training in queen rearing starts with the selection of the best queen in the apiary, one that has had a good record for several seasons. The hive should have been vigorous for 1 or 2 seasons with an excellent honey yield. The brood pattern should be very even without many gaps, and the queen should be big in size. From this hive we will get our selected queen material. In order to obtain larvae for grafting, we insert one frame with empty drawn-out cells between 2 queen excluders and place the queen on this comb. She will lay eggs, which hatch into larvae after 3 days, and after 1 more day the frame can be used for grafting. The beekeeper has now to transfer the very young larvae into self-made queen cups, which should be primed with royal jelly from other cells. However, it soon became clear that the grafting method needs considerable practice and seems too complicated. Hence, queen rearing continued with the cup kit system, which can be purchased from bee suppliers in Europe. The cup kit box is filled with plastic cells into which the queen will directly lay eggs. Without being touched, the hatched larvae can then be transferred into a queen cell building colony. We take a brood comb from our selected breeder colony and cut out a piece of comb identical to the shape of the cup kit box. The box is fitted and fixed to the top bar. The frame should be put back into the hive for 1 or 2 days, so that the bees can clean it and familiarise themselves with the foreign object. We continue preparing a feeding cake to be added to the box. The queen, which was secured and caged earlier, is now released behind the queen excluder screen of the box, and the entrance hole is closed. It is safer to do this operation in a secure place to prevent any risk of the queen flying away. The cup kit box is now inserted back into the colony, and feed should be provided. The timetable has to be followed thoroughly, as the slightest mistake will lead to failure. We are now on day 0, where the queen is confined in the cup kit box. The next day, day 1, we open the hive and check the cup kit box for laid eggs. If the queen has not yet laid eggs in the cells, or has laid too few, we close again and wait another day. If the cells are filled with eggs, we can release the queen and let the bees nurse the eggs on day 2 or 3. On day 3, we have to prepare the queenless cell builder colony. If insufficient food is coming in during this period, the hive should receive feed for some days. The selected hive must be crowded with bees in 2 chambers. The queen is removed and the brood frames should be rearranged with plenty of young larvae in the centre of the brood nest on top.
Okay?
Yep.
The next day, day 4 in our timetable, the eggs in the colony with the cup kit have hatched into larvae. We move the frame with the cup kit box to a safe place and transfer the cups with the most developed larvae to the prepared rearing bar. The bar is now inserted in our prepared queenless cell builder colony in the centre of the brood nest. The queenless bees will immediately rush to nurse the larvae in order to generate new queens. The next day, we just check carefully that the bees have accepted the larvae and how many of them. On day 6 and 7, the larvae is growing, and on day 8, the queen cells will be sealed by the bees. Feeding can now be suspended. On day 9, all queen cells should be in the stage of being pupae. We must search the entire colony for wild emergency cells, and if we find some, they have to be removed. If we overlook only one of them, the first hatching queen will destroy all other waiting queens in their cells. There is nothing to do on day 10 and 11, but on day 12 we have to prepare the mating hives. Each hatching virgin queen must mate in a separate hive. For a small beekeeper, it is impossible to provide many mating hives unless he splits all his colonies into small nuclei. This is a great risk, and there will be no honey in this season. It is better to create 1 or 2 hives with baby frames at the start of the season, from which baby nukes can be created as needed. Each baby nuke must be queenless and contain an open brood, otherwise the bees will abscond. Feeding must be carried out at regular intervals. On day 13, the queen cells can be removed and each mating nuke receives 1 cell. The virgin queen will hatch during the next 2 days, on day 14 or 15, and some days later she will go on the mating flight. There must be plenty of drones in hives within a few kilometres ready for mating, otherwise all efforts will be fruitless. The old queen may now be given back to our cell-building colony, but must be caged for some days, or instead one of the queen cells may be left in this hive. Sometimes it happens that the beekeeper is not thorough enough in his time planning or is very busy during the days before hatching. In order to avoid queens hatching too early, he can secure the queen cells with a special cage which belongs to the cup kit system. But great care must be applied not to damage the cells. In this case, the hatched virgin is transferred to the mating nuke. Better to leave her at first caged, because a virgin is often not as easily accepted as a queen cell. The mating nukes should not be disturbed until day 30, when the new queen should be found laying eggs. If not, the last check should be done on day 36. If the queen has not started laying eggs at this time, mating has failed and she should be destroyed. There are many possible variations from what we have seen, but one cannot expect that all started cells will result in fertilized queens. The failure rate may sometimes go up to 50%, especially during the first trials, until experience improves the success rate.
So, pagka Friday, Saturday, nikuha na siya, ning larva na siya, 1 day old larva. Hatch na siya. So, pag Saturday,
isang, meaning, kagapong gichik na sana, kita na sa itlog. So, hindi na, pahilam mo nang ito mo.
Out of all bee products, honey is the most important, and for small beekeepers, usually the only product they sell. When the honey is ripe, the bees seal the honey cells with a wax layer. Ripe means the water content of the honey, which can be measured with a refractometer, is reduced by the bees to less than 20%. Only pure sealed honey combs without brood or pollen should be harvested. Honey, which is not covered by a wax layer, will ferment and get spoiled very soon. The bees are brushed off and the honey frames are stored in an empty chamber. The great moment has come. The honey is carried to the processing place. As processing and storage of honey in open places or houses without water and electricity is inadequate, the project funded a small honey factory. The wax layer is removed with an uncapping fork and the frames are put in an extractor. This type of extractor is manufactured locally. The frames are now spun and the extracted honey runs freely through some strainers into buckets. The empty combs should be given back to the bees, which will enjoy the cleaning. Only plastic or stainless steel containers with a tight lid are suitable. In the Philippines, with high air humidity even during the summer season, honey will draw moisture from the air and get easily spoilt if left in open containers. It was also noticed that all honey harvested at the end of the season, towards May, had a water content above 20% and was therefore not suitable for sale. After some days of storage, small wax particles have settled at the top and must be skimmed off. The honey is ready for bottling. Inputs like jars and labels must be purchased in time. The safest place to store honey is in jars.
460 grams.
There was never a problem regarding the shelf life of honey because everything was sold locally within days. It was confirmed again that in beekeeping development projects, usually the problem is the low quantity of production and not the market.
Maamangin pila tong 200 to 220 pila tong ino. Di man sa ibutang. Tapos ang atong sekretary mo say na disa nga na-receive halin sa imo mo ang kantidad yan ito mo.
A popular drink in the Philippines is a mixture of honey and calamansi juice, which has the reputation of helping combat coughs and colds. It was thought that honey with a high water content may be used for making such a drink. However, the first trial failed because of fermentation, and this revealed that more sophisticated equipment, expensive inputs and machinery for pasteurization would be needed. A similar experience resulted from pollen collection trials. First of all, the period for pollen collection is extremely short. Secondly, there is a general shortage of pollen, which is so urgently needed by the bees for feeding the larvae. And furthermore, pollen must be collected daily, requires drying equipment and storage in a fridge. There is a strong market in the Philippines for pollen in health shops, but the processing and marketing is beyond the capacity of small beekeepers. However, we would have been satisfied to have collected sufficient pollen just for feeding our bees during the monsoon period. Other bee products, such as those seen at the beginning of the video, are the domain of commercial beekeepers with many hives and the capacity to establish and manage larger enterprises. Nevertheless, the sale of honey generated considerable income and provided a good reason for celebration. The biggest threat to beekeeping with Apis mellifera is a mite called Varroa jacobsoni. Originally, it occurred only in Asia, where the local honeybees were resistant and could control their population. During the last 2 decades, the mite spread throughout the world and affected the western honeybee, which is defenceless. The mites enter brood cells before they are capped, deposit eggs, and feed from the larvae during their pupal stage. When the crippled bees emerge from their cells, the mites have multiplied and then infest other brood cells until the colony collapses. Working with Apis mellifera in Asia requires constant control of mite populations with chemical or biological methods. All colonies have to be checked regularly for mite infestation. Here you can see how mites cling to the bee's body and live from the bee's blood before they enter new brood cells for mating. Dead bees on the bottom floor may also indicate the presence of varroa. If many crippled bees can be seen already on the combs, it is usually too late for successful treatment and the colony may soon die. Hence, it is absolutely necessary to detect varroa at an early stage. One method is to insert varroa floors at the hive bottom. Here, a floor is prepared by rubbing a paper sheet with petroleum jelly. Close it with a screen and put it at the bottom of the hive. Mites who drop from time to time will stick to the paper. The beekeeper can count the number of dropped mites and assess the presence and increase of varroa. Usually, apistan, an imported chemical strip, is used to combat varroa. The strips are hung between the frames and should be removed after 2 months when they have expired. However, many beekeepers use them several times or don't keep records. As well as the danger of contaminated honey, if the strips are used during the honey flow, this may lead to resistant mites or the strips may be completely ineffective. Treatment must be applied every year, once or twice, and every application will cost about $4. Hence, the project promoted the use of formic acid, which is a biological agent available in the Philippines, which does not leave any residue and costs less than $1 per treatment. However, it is hazardous and more complicated to apply. The concentration has to be diluted according to a formula. Protective gear is mandatory and care must be taken in storing formic acid. When mixing, always use the water first and then the acid.
Apa? Pagkitsa ko na yun. Suba. Grabe berpiloto.
Agpana.
Oh, bunguton man, bunguton.
Tapos,
Feeding should never be forgotten when treating against varroa. Bees in the Philippines also have other enemies and predators to fight off, such as ants, wasps, bee-eating birds and frogs. The red ants are the most vicious enemies. They go for the brood and can wipe out entire colonies of bees. The small sugar ants may overwhelm a hive if it is either not protected or weakened by hunger or disease. After heavy losses, the brick stands were replaced by metal stands, which rest in tins filled with old engine oil to give better protection. The most common bee disease is probably chalk brood. This fungus disease occurs frequently because of the long rainy season and high air humidity in the Philippines. Weak colonies and poor foraging conditions encourage chalk brood and let the fungus grow. The young brood dies and the dead larvae will dry into a hard chalk-like mummy, hence the name chalk brood. Many different measures and chemicals have been tried and suggested, but no official treatment is available at the market. If the affected colony has survived, the symptoms may disappear, but the persistent spores will reoccur in the next rainy season. Another disease is the European foul brood. The combs show irregular scattered and sunken cell cappings. The larvae dies and change their colour to yellow or brown. Antibiotics have been successfully applied to combat this disease. The diagnosis of diseases and selection of treatment is very difficult because diseases often occur together with varroa or with multiple symptoms, and poor foraging conditions encourage chalk brood and let the fungus grow. The beekeeping project at Negros cannot be considered a great success story. The mountainous regions do not provide sufficient food for the bees, and too much rain during too long a period of the year jeopardizes the bees' survival. The imported European bee species Apis mellifera may not be considered appropriate for small farmers and may not thrive in upland areas. The required skills, technology and equipment of frame hive beekeeping are too sophisticated and costly. Several groups of participants pulled out during the course of the project when it became obvious that beekeeping would not pay in the short term and requires a lot of dedication, patience and learning. The losses of bee colonies were enormous. Of the 149 established colonies, 99 were lost during the 3-year period. Sudden disappearance of the queen, supersedure during the droneless period, and starvation of bees were the major reasons. To rear or to buy sufficient new queens in order to compensate for the lost colonies was not possible. Most hives were too weak for generating or splitting nuclei. The complex process of queen rearing was learned by only a few beekeepers, and doubts remain that they will be able to continue or to pass on the skills and knowledge to others after the end of the project. At the outset, it was assumed that a hive would generate 20 kilograms of honey per year. As an incentive, the beekeepers kept 50% of the profits from honey sales after every harvest for themselves. It was calculated that the return of the investment would then be possible within a period of 3 years. But later, the reality looked different. After 3 years, half of the loans had to be written off, and from the rest, only 16% have been returned so far. Although the overall quantity of honey increased every year, and each occupied hive also generated more honey, the highest amount produced was an average of 5.3 kilograms per occupied hive. The beekeeping training and support will continue for another year. Some of the obstacles to successful beekeeping may be overcome during this period. At least, many people have become aware about the interlinkage between bees and the environment and how important bees are for pollination and conservation. And maybe some individuals have got the motivation and the interest to continue and improve beekeeping in the Philippines. One day, some of them may join the few existing commercial beekeepers because the demand for good quality honey is ever increasing.